Hello, good evening and welcome to Biz1st Review 360, your weekly roundup of the top business news and developments impacting the economy. This week we saw a shake-up in several ministries, with President Maithripala Sirisena shuffling secretaries between 6 ministries, including the ministries of law and order and justice. In the political arena, things are heating up with the elections just around the corner and also the highly awaited, anticipated report of the Presidential Commission of Inquiry on the Treasury bond issuances. We have an insightful program lined up for you today. We start with a conversation between my producer Charita Fernando and the German ambassador Jon Rode on improving bilateral relations and trade ties between Sri Lanka and Germany.
Ambassador Yonder, thank you very much for coming on Biz1st Review 360. I would like to ask you something about an observation you made recently at a business forum. You said the Sri Lankan government must walk the talk in terms of strengthening governance. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
I mean, first I would like to say some words on the economic performance, because when I mentioned this, or when I said this, mentioned the statement, walk the talk, the government proclaims its aim, which we support, to be a hub in South Asia. And to be a hub, take countries like Singapore or Hong Kong or Taiwan. What are the parameters of hubs? You know, it's efficient infrastructure, a legal environment, very high indicators or low indicators on corruption, and an open economy. So this is the benchmark, and I think in this direction Sri Lanka has to move, and there is still room for improvement. That's what I meant with walk the talk on the economic side, you know, to have an open, competitive economy. The new budget moves into that direction. Just see the discussion on liberalizing the shipping industry. The neighboring countries have liberalized, and I think a hub has to have a liberalized, especially when you're an island nation, so that foreign investors come in. The second thing on governance too. Political governance, it means, you know, to have a legal environment where local and foreigners alike, when there is a judicial case, that you don't have to wait 10 years in order to get a judgment, because this is not investor friendly, nor is it friendly to your own citizens. Then you are a bit frustrated about getting justice, you know, and time is a big factor in that. And places like, you know, Singapore, they ensure that decisions are made rather quick.
Right. Since you mentioned liberalization, it seems that it's a very taboo word in Sri Lanka. There are lots of opposition from various quarters when there's some idea of liberalizing a particular sector. How does countries like Germany or even in the EU address these different, you know, protests or opposition when you come up with a new concept?
I mean, if you go after entrenched or vested interests, it's always difficult, because it was always the case, and now you move into a new territory. But the whole idea of the European Union is about free trade, liberal economy. It doesn't mean it's not a Manchester capitalism. We have rules, we have regulations, and they are enforced. And that always comes with liberalization. Liberalization doesn't mean you have a lawless or a ruleless field, you know, compared maybe to a football game. You compete, but there are clear rules, and if you overstep, if you violate rules, you're punished. And I think that doesn't prevent liberalization, but it means a level playing field.
Do you see any potential for any new industries or exports?
It is very important that Sri Lanka diversifies its export portfolio, whether it's more electronic products, generally in the manufacturing, IT, but in the end it's up to Sri Lanka to develop that industry rather quickly, because as we all know, GSP Plus there's a limit, because Sri Lanka has moved into lower middle income status. We see a very positive development on our bilateral trade figures. 2014 we had a volume of about 700 million euros. This year, and this is only 4 years later, in the end we will probably reach 1.2 billion euros, which is $1.5 billion almost. So there's a huge increase in Sri Lankan exports. Sri Lanka still has a trade surplus with Germany, but also German exports. So this is a very positive development. The downside is it's still mostly trade. We do not have yet the investments I wish that would be possible, and I think there's also room for liberalization. Take Sri Lanka still has capital exchange controls. Hubs don't have them. Any control doesn't mean enforcement of rules, but controls are generally, let's say, not conducive to increase in investments. You can have a legal environment, and that I think there is still room to improve these regulatory framework conditions.
Okay, you mentioned about the potential for greater trade between Sri Lanka and Germany. Is that why you plan to have a joint Chamber of Commerce here? Could you tell us a little bit more on that?
Yeah. I mean, the potential is slowly being realized. As I said, in the 3.5 years from 700 million, already this year in October, we have surpassed the bilateral trade from the whole of last year, which was 900. And that's why 2 weeks ago, the German Chamber of Commerce Association decided to establish an office basically for a German chamber. And I am very confident it will be operational in the first 3 months of 2018.
And what kind of services will this?
The services will be, if you're a Sri Lankan exporter, you want to acquire about market conditions. Please connect me to some electronic industries because I have products to offer. Or if you need information about Germany, is I would say the hub for trade fairs in Europe. One of the biggest trade fairs, tourism, ITB, industrial trade fairs, Hanover Fair, you name it. This is a centuries-old tradition. That's where you have to go. Or if you want to establish joint ventures, or if you want to invest in Germany, or the chamber, this office might also organize seminars for German potential investors to bring them together with potential Sri Lankan partners. So it's a whole range of services which they can offer. This will be a nucleus. Maybe in 2 or 3 years it will develop into a full-fledged joint chamber where German and Sri Lankan companies will become members, like we have in almost 200 countries in the world.
At a time we are taking an effort to boost trade between the two countries. What is your assessment of Sri Lanka's ease of doing business? We slipped one notch recently as well.
Yeah.
As from an investor point of view, what is your assessment of Sri Lanka's business climate?
Yeah, I mean, an indicator is what the word says. It's an indicator. It gives you a hint where you stand. And whether it's the ease of doing business index or the corruption index or the World Competitiveness Report, all these indicators indicate there's room for improvement for Sri Lanka, especially since India improved its ranking in a lot of these indicators in the last 2-3 years. And so as a relatively small country, Sri Lanka has the clear potential to become a hub. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the new the new budget goes in the right direction. Liberalize, enforce the rules, create level playing field. You know, it's all no rocket science. You just need clear rules and sustainable. The worst thing for an investor is if you don't know if this rule which is existing now is the same rule which will exist 2 months later. You know, uncertainty is basically poison for every investor. And I think this is the most important message Sri Lanka has to follow, have a sustainable policy when it comes to taxes. Most European countries are high tax countries, but people know there's a clear path, there's certainty, and you can expect also service for your taxes, And Germany is not a low tax country; it's quite high. But as I said, the parameters, a legal framework which is reliable, the infrastructure, whether it's power, whether it's logistics, and here Sri Lanka has very good preconditions. For example, the shipping. Sri Lanka is the transshipment place for a lot of Indian, and also when it comes to the internet, G4. Power situation, everybody knows that about the previews that there needs to be a lot of investment, especially to go green, because power from water is almost maxed out, and to have diesel imports is firstly very costly and not very effective. So green power is the future, like we do in Germany.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charita.
Let's take a look at some other stories that made headlines this week.
The International Conference on Innovations in Focus Business and Technology, titled ICIIT 2017, took place in Colombo with the participation of local and international researchers, academics and industrial personnel in the fields of computing and business management. Participants engaged with cutting-edge research presentations and joined in panel discussions chaired by leading Sri Lankan technocrats on business innovations through big data analytics. The conference was organized by the Informatics Institute of Technology and sponsored by the E-Learning and Technical Communications ACM Professional Chapter, Japan section.
Welcome back to the show. 2017 has been a very interesting year for Sri Lanka. But what does the private sector make of it? What are the hopes and aspirations of the private sector going into 2018? To discuss this and more, we're joined by the chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Rajendra Tyagaraja, a highly respected banker as well. Mr. Tyagaraja, 2017, in terms of government policies, when you look at the economic indicators, the numbers are not as great and grand as they used to be a few years ago. Has it given you cause for concern?
Yes and no. From a no perspective, the real issue is a lot of initiatives in terms of policy reform. But I think what seems to be lacking is the need for prioritization of those reforms. The second thing is, once you prioritize, to have them adequately communicated to stakeholder engagement. And then once that is done, the need for better communication to the general public, so you articulate the rationale of reform. And then I think what's most important, lacking from a private sector perspective, is holding people accountable for the execution of the reform. So I think those four are important attributes which we would like to see strengthened. And if I look at one document, well, certainly there has been some engagement. If you look at the 2018 budget as an example, certainly there were less surprises than before, because it resonated very well with the two previous published documents, the Vision 25 as well as the PM's 2017 statement. But now that that is there, it's a great opportunity for the policymakers to track and publicly communicate the execution, and the key deliverable is the revenue shortfall, the management of that, and then also accountability.
You mentioned that accountability. It's very interesting because just before the budget was presented this year, Verity Research compiled a budget tracker on the previous year's budgets of several previous governments, and they discovered that over 50% of major pledges that were made through the budget have not been implemented. This time around, the finance minister has appointed a committee of sorts, a team headed by two individuals called the Budget Implementation Unit, to ensure that all of it is implemented. Are you confident that the implementation will be better in 2018?
So Chamber would like to give the benefit of doubt to the committee appointed for this, because I think they are very highly respected individuals, and I'm sure they will at this stage be putting their own personal credibility at stake to really walk the talk. From the Chamber's point of view, we have extended our hand of friendship to work for the Economic Intelligence Unit of the Chamber, to work very closely with that team, and in whatever way we can to collectively improve the communication and to the general public to track the execution of this plan.
Mr. Tyagaraja, there has been some uncertainty surrounding the policy movements of the government. I'll explain that statement. Now, we've seen as you mentioned, the Prime Minister's statement, the Vision 2025 sort of grand manifesto, and the 2018 Blue-Green budget. And as you mentioned correctly, these are complementary to each other. Now, next month, the President will be releasing his own Sustainable Sri Lanka Vision 2030 document. There's a worry here that if that, coming from a SLFP line of thinking, contradicts the UNP line of thinking, where will the compromises be made? Does that concern you? Is that a real worry for you?
Yes and no. Again, given that there has been ample opportunity between the 2025 document, the 2018 budget, and the outcome of the 2030 in terms of timing, I believe there has been enough time for those who have been crafting the 2030 statement with Sustainable Development Agenda to resonate and make sure that there is more congruence in the communique rather than divergence. One thing I tend to believe in the 2030, the village unit certainly is clearly engaged in terms of its role in the overall national economic renaissance. And if you look at, industries like ICT, which are the more newer technology adoption, Sri Lanka still, we have around 1/3 of our population contributing to around just under 10% of GDP in agriculture. Blessed with green gold there. And I think there is a huge opportunity, even from an export point of view, to look at national export strategy to link agri-processing and exports. And to actually, if I read this correctly, the 2030 probably has an opportunity to engage at the Grammy and the village level and catalyze the village level to also become a part of this whole value and supply chain, as opposed to leaving it to a handful of large-scale entities. So I think there is an opportunity for the congruence, but we'll have to wait and see.
There's also, when you talk about this sustainability and sustainable development, I want to bring your attention back to the private sector. At the Chamber's Best Corporate Citizen Award ceremony that was held recently, the head of the panel of judges, Mr. Adli Pereira, had commented that only 10% of Chamber members had even submitted applications. What's your take on that? Is it a cause for concern, or is it an increase on previous years?
I think it reflects two aspects to it. That an annual award, whether there is relevance for an annual award, because sustainability is not a 12-month activity where you then compete, because it's an ongoing process. And there may have been situations where you had a number of well-managed corporates committed to sustainability, championing projects which go through across calendar years. And it probably doesn't make sense for them to annually submit something when it takes maybe 24 to 36 months to carry out a meaningful project. So that may be one reason. And secondly, there are those who have sustainability in their DNA, but not necessarily believe in doing it for competition. So I think there is, certainly the competition raises the bar. It gives an opportunity for every year for a new group of corporates to come in, showcase what they have done well and be recognized. But it's not the only tool to stimulate sustainability.
We'll be right back after this short commercial break. We'll be talking to the chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce, Mr. Rajendra Tyagaraja, about the private sector's hopes and aspirations in 2018. Welcome back. We're in conversation with the chairman of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. We're talking about the hopes and aspirations of the private sector in the coming year. Mr. Tyagaraja, I'll start by asking, what are your hopes for 2018?
So let me touch on maybe 4 or 5 areas which I think are opportunities for Sri Lanka in 18. The first is, I think we'd like to see, we hope that the reduction or the slowness in mobilizing FDIs will get arrested, because I think given the quantum of debt the nation currently has, certainly continuing to fund the national economy through debt is not an option. So yes, as a moderate economy, we need to look at this opportunity. But from what I understand, the FDI strategy of the country is very much linked to the private-public partnership framework, given that the state itself owns a fair amount of resources which needs to be harnessed.
Is that framework working?
So that's what I was just going to come. I think a lot more work has to be certainly done, and certainly I think from our perspective as a private sector, we'd like to see certainly more communication and information as to how this framework is there to work. Certainly one example of the positives which we have seen is in terms of the 2 ports. Given the role China is expected to play in the next decade with the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, and where Sri Lanka is plugged in, that I think was a very positive initiative, at least from our point of view. Then secondly, we also speak about exports and the importance of exports, but we are still not seeing the exports rising to the extent we would like to see. We certainly welcome that the national policy is driven by 2 tools. One is the national export strategy, and second is the trade policy framework. But we certainly would like to see more on the agri space. We'd like to see more processing and value addition rather than primary exports, because there's only a certain quantum of primary produce you can keep on producing and finding a market locally. So that's point one. The second thing is the role of the SME. I think we'd like to see, even the current budget has given a lot of promise and opportunities for SME, but I think there is a role for the SMEs to also improve their capacity in terms of better governance practices, better compliance and risk management framework, which in the medium to long run will give them definitely a better access to affordable financing. So that's...
In light of what you've just been saying, the finance minister in the budget said there's going to be a broad wave of liberalization. In light of what you've been saying in like the SME sector, the need to adopt international best practices and access to financing, etc., do you feel that this broad wave of liberalization will be detrimental or will complement
I think on a personal basis, I think it will certainly complement, because the more you look at liberalization, this is, whether we like it or don't like it, a small island. And when we speak about island, an island for its survival has to depend on trade, cross-border trade. And for cross-border trade, one needs to look at trade liberalization, at least at a minimum. So that, I think, from a personal perspective, is a done thing. But if I can touch on a couple of other things which we would like to see, adaptation of technology in terms of ease of doing and plug in the country. I think while there's a lot of talk, we can do much more. And if I just pick perhaps 3 pieces of legislation or initiatives which you would like to see, the discussion about this digital national ID, it's long overdue to connect people. The use of biometric authentication. And also, given that Sri Lanka is, and corporate Sri Lanka in particular, is also going the digital journey, there is a huge threat coming in terms of data security and hacking. And there is definitely a need for national infrastructure building in terms of a National Security Operations Center, we call it a SOC, even for different industries like banking and other industries to develop their own SOC, because small and medium businesses cannot invest enough in building this infrastructure. But as a nation, if focus is given on that, given the root of e-commerce and digital, this will certainly help to position Sri Lanka as a far more business savvy and agile nation.
Can I ask you, there's been a lot of talk recently about the shipping and logistics industry as well. We saw the finance minister saying that the interests of the thousands of exporters matter more than the interests of 5 shipping giants or the 5 or so shipping companies. What work has the chamber sort of been doing with the shipping and logistics sector?
So we recognize 2 things, the role or the aspiration to liberalize shipping as an industry, and then secondly, that more micro level statement of improving or increasing the ownership in shipping agencies by foreigners. And I think those 2 have to be perhaps treated separately. What the chamber has been doing is, it is not about taking a position, because the industry as a whole has different stakeholders. And what we have been doing is engaging the various stakeholders, giving them a platform to express their various pros and cons, and wherever there is a need, to take the 2 sides of the argument to the policymakers. And that is the role of a responsible chamber, and we will continue to do that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tyagaraja, for taking time off your schedule and joining us on Biz1st Review 360. It's been a pleasure.
Pleasure is
always. And that's a wrap of our show for tonight. I'll see you again, same time, same place next week. Until then, good night and good luck.